I never imagined my daughter's funeral would be the stage for her father's grand reappearance. There I was, standing in the aisle of the church, clutching the edges of the pew just to keep from collapsing. When I saw him stride in like he owned the place, 15 years of silence, and suddenly he walked down that aisle as if time, betrayal, and abandonment meant nothing. I had buried my anger long ago, or at least I thought I had. But seeing him that morning, polished shoes clicking on the tile, hair perfectly combed, expensive suit tailored just right, it all came rushing back. He had vanished when Emma was 8, leaving me to pick up the broken pieces. And yet here he was, sitting himself right at the front, sliding into the pew beside me, as if he had any right to grieve the child he'd abandoned. I could feel my pulse thundering in my ears. My daughter, my only child, lay in her casket a few feet away. And all I could think about was how this man had forfeited every privilege of calling himself her father. He had missed everything: the fevers, the school plays, the tears after breakups, the late nights coding when she was determined to prove herself. He hadn't been there when we faced the worst, when her body weakened from chemotherapy. No, he had been gone. And now he returned because Emma's company had been valued at $35 million. That was the currency that brought him back to church that day. Not love, not grief, money. My grief turned sharp, molten, burning away the numbness that had carried me through the last week. Every word the pastor spoke about Emma's kindness and brilliance was a dagger, because I saw him nodding along like he had been part of her journey. He wanted to rewrite history with a performance polished enough to fool strangers in the crowd, but not me, never me. That morning, I realized this funeral was not the end of my suffering. It was the beginning of something uglier. He had come prepared. I noticed it in the way he carried himself. The faint smirk he thought I wouldn't see. The legal pad tucked discreetly in his lawyer's briefcase. He wasn't just here to mourn. He was here to claim, and I knew, deep down, that he was hiding something. Some trick, some paperwork, some manipulation he planned to unleash when the time was right. What he didn't realize was that Emma had always been 3 steps ahead of him. When he walked out, Emma was just 8 years old. I can still see her that day, building a blanket fort in our living room, her little hands clutching her favorite teddy bear, blissfully unaware that her father had already packed his bags. She kept asking when he would be back, convinced that he'd only stepped out for a short trip. That night, she sat by the window for hours, waiting, until her eyelids grew heavy and I carried her to bed. I remember whispering to myself that I had to be strong, even if every part of me was breaking. Raising her alone was never easy. There were years when my body ached from exhaustion. When I juggled 2 jobs just to keep a roof over our heads and food on the table. I remember rushing from late shifts at the hospital to catch her school recitals, still wearing my work uniform, praying I hadn't missed too much. Some nights, she'd do her homework beside me at the kitchen table, the 2 of us sharing the same lamplight while I balanced bills, and she scribbled out math problems. We didn't have much, but we had each other. That was enough. Emma was always different. She had this spark, this way of looking at the world, like it was a puzzle she could solve if she just thought long and hard enough. By the time she was 12, she was already tinkering with old computers I'd picked up at garage sales. I didn't understand half of what she was doing, but I understood her passion. She wanted to build, to create, to make something that mattered. Her father's betrayal left a scar, though she rarely spoke of it directly. Instead, she channeled it into determination. She used to tell me that no one should ever suffer because of someone else's carelessness. She was talking about him, though she dressed it up in the language of technology and security. That pain, that sense of abandonment, became her fuel. She built her dreams not in spite of what he had done, but almost because of it, and despite her brilliance, she never lost her compassion. She was the kind of young woman who would stay up all night coding, then spend the next morning volunteering at a local shelter, helping kids with their homework. She'd give away her allowance to classmates who couldn't afford lunch. Her heart was as big as her ambition. Looking back, I realized she was always preparing for life's uncertainties. When other teenagers were dreaming about prom dresses, Emma was reading about data security and how to protect people from losing. What mattered most? She saw vulnerability in the world, maybe because she knew what it felt like firsthand, and she refused to let that vulnerability define her. Even in her kindness, there was a quiet steel, a sense that she knew the world wasn't fair, and she was determined to be ready when it wasn't. At the time, I thought it was just her way of coping with the absence of her father. But now, standing in the shadow of everything she left behind, I see it for what it really was: preparation. Emma never underestimated the possibility of betrayal. She carried that awareness like armor, even when she smiled. And as I sat in that church, listening to the man who had abandoned her pretend he had the right to mourn her, I realized she might have anticipated even this moment. After the service, the air in the church shifted. People gathered in small circles, exchanging condolences and sharing memories of Emma. I should have been standing among them, accepting their words with quiet dignity. Instead, I found myself watching him, my ex-husband, moving through the crowd like he belonged. He clasped hands, nodded solemnly, even managed to squeeze out a few tears when he thought someone was watching. It was a performance, and I hated myself for recognizing how well he played the part. To those who didn't know better, he looked like a grieving father carrying the weight of unbearable loss. But I knew the truth. He hadn't been there when Emma built her first app at 16, or when she cried herself to sleep the night her first investor pulled out. He hadn't sat through the endless chemotherapy sessions, holding her hand while she drifted in and out of pain. He hadn't been there for any of it. And yet, here he was, accepting sympathy for a role he had abandoned years ago. My chest tightened as I remembered the day he left. No apologies, no hesitation, just a man chasing something easier. Someone else's comfort, instead of standing by his family. I remembered Emma waiting at the window, convinced he'd come back for her. He never did. The truth was simple. He had traded fatherhood for freedom, and freedom had cost him nothing, while it had cost us everything. But what cut deeper than his presence was the entitlement. Even as I stood at the casket, he leaned closer, murmuring about Emma's estate. His voice was low, but I caught enough to understand he believed he had a right to her success. He believed that after 15 years of silence, he could claim the fortune she had built with her blood, her brilliance, and her sacrifice. The anger I felt in that moment could have burned the church to the ground. But beneath the fury was something else: suspicion. Something didn't fit. His confidence was too sharp, too rehearsed. He didn't just show up hoping to stake a claim. He came armed, certain of something I didn't yet know. That certainty began to unravel later, when his lawyer approached me. The man was polite, professional, even a little hesitant. He spoke carefully, each word chosen like it was being weighed on a scale. He mentioned maintained rights instead of guaranteed rights. He stressed the need for review, for documentation. His tone wasn't one of authority, but of caution. And in that caution, I heard the first crack in their story. It was as though the lawyer knew something my ex-husband had failed to admit. Something about his status, his standing, his claim. The phrasing was deliberate, the hesitation telling. He had not said, "You have rights." He had said, "You may maintain rights." And those words rang in my ears long after he walked away. That was the moment my grief gave way to suspicion. The anger didn't fade, but it sharpened into focus. If there was a weakness in his case, if there was a truth he had buried, I would find it. And something in my gut told me Emma had already found it long before me. The morning after the funeral, I sat at the kitchen table staring into a cup of coffee that had long gone. Cold. The house was unbearably quiet without Emma's laughter, without her presence filling every corner. I thought grief would be my only burden that week. But as I sifted through the boxes she left behind, I discovered Emma had left me more than memories. She had left a map, a defense, a fortress carefully designed for this very moment. Tucked inside a folder labeled simply, "For Mom," were letters written in her careful, steady handwriting. I could barely read through the blur of tears. But the message was clear. Emma had expected her father to come crawling back the moment she was gone. She knew him better than I ever wanted her to. She warned me not to be blindsided, not to let him twist the past. And most of all, she told me she had already taken steps to protect both me and her legacy. Each letter revealed another piece of her quiet genius. She had hired attorneys to draft protections. She had consulted mentors who guided her through estate planning. She even built a trail of evidence documenting her father's abandonment, as if she knew he would try to rewrite history one day. My daughter, even in the final months of her life, had been preparing for a fight she would never see, and she trusted me to carry it forward. What stunned me most was not just her foresight, but her compassion. Among the documents, I found correspondence with another woman, Carol, a single mother raising a daughter of her own. Her story felt painfully familiar, a man who had walked into their lives with charm and promises, only to disappear when responsibility became inconvenient. It was him, my ex-husband. He had repeated the same cycle, abandoning yet another child. And Emma, instead of turning bitter, had reached out to this girl, helping her prepare for college, reminding her she was worth something. My daughter had transformed her pain into purpose. She refused to let another child feel as unwanted as she once did. But the most devastating revelation came tucked in the back of a legal folder. A court document dated over a decade ago, signed in ink that had long since dried. It was a termination of parental rights. He had voluntarily surrendered his legal claim to Emma when she was just 11, all to avoid paying a few $100s a month in child support. The choice was chilling in its simplicity. To him, fatherhood had a price tag and it was too high. The outrage hit me like a storm. For years, I had believed his absence was abandonment of the heart. Cruel but intangible. But here it was. In black and white, he had abandoned her legally, too. He had given up every right to call her his daughter. And now, with shameless arrogance, he had returned to claim the fortune she built without him. Bittersweet pride swelled in me as I held Emma's papers close. She had seen it all coming. She had known that the man who once walked out would walk back in if money was involved. And she had built her defenses with the precision of someone who refused to let betrayal define her future. In that moment, I stopped feeling powerless. Emma had already armed me with the truth, and I knew the time would come when that truth would shatter his entire performance. It didn't take long for the story to escape the walls of my home and spill into the world. At first, it was just whispers, curious questions from neighbors who had seen him at the funeral, acting like the grieving father he never was. But within a week, local journalists picked up the thread. One headline burned into my mind. Father who abandoned daughter seeks. Multi-million-dollar inheritance. The truth spread like wildfire. Reporters dug into public records. And the old court document, the one where he had signed away his parental rights, became evidence for the world to see. It was no longer just my word against his. It was fact. Cold, legal fact. And the image he had so carefully polished, successful, respectable, entitled, began to crumble under the weight of his own decisions. I watched it all unfold from my living room, the television screen flickering with news segments. For the first time, I didn't feel alone in my outrage. Strangers felt it too. Commentators expressed disbelief, readers left thousands of furious comments. And people who had never met Emma felt protective of her memory. The very stage he tried to claim had turned against him. But the fallout didn't end there. His current wife, Linda, saw the headlines and discovered truths he had kept hidden from her as well. She had never even known he had a daughter. Imagine her fury when she realized she had married a man who had lied about his past. A man who had abandoned not only me, but Emma and others too. She filed for divorce almost immediately, freezing their accounts and leaving him scrambling. The very foundation of his comfortable life collapsed beneath his feet. And then came the flood of voices. Other women, other families. One by one, they began to step forward, sharing eerily familiar stories. A charming man who moved in, promised stability, drained resources, and vanished when money ran out. I listened as names and faces emerged, as patterns unfolded. It was never just us. He had left a trail of broken households behind him, each one echoing the same betrayal. Emma had already found some of them before she passed, quietly helping a girl named Sarah through the pain of abandonment. Now, more followed, ready to tell their truths. The satisfaction I felt wasn't cruel, it was justice. For years, I had lived with the weight of silence, carrying Emma through her struggles without ever exposing the man who caused them. Now the silence was shattered. His reputation wasn't just bruised, it was ruined. And every attempt he made to defend himself only dug the hole deeper. That was when Emma's final brilliance revealed itself. In her letters, she had hinted at protections. But I hadn't realized just how meticulous she had been. She had built what I can only describe as a legal trap. If he pursued the inheritance, every step he took would trigger more disclosures, documents, testimonies, financial records that dismantled his credibility. The harder he pushed, the more the world would learn about his fraud, his lies, his cowardice. It was elegant in its cruelty, but also profoundly just. Emma hadn't simply barred him from her estate. She had turned his greed into his undoing. He thought he was walking into a battle he could win. Instead, he was stepping straight into a fortress. She had designed a fortress that made sure the only prize waiting for him was humiliation. Watching his downfall unfold, I realized Emma hadn't just protected me. She had ensured that her father's pattern would never be able to repeat. Unchecked. His name, once hidden behind charm and pretense, was now synonymous with abandonment and betrayal. And there was nothing he could do to escape it. The day came when he finally faced the consequences he had spent his whole life running from. Courtrooms that once seemed distant and irrelevant now became the stage where his true character was laid bare. Evidence poured in legal documents, testimonies from women he had deceived, records of financial exploitation. He tried to protest, tried to twist the story into something sympathetic. But every word only bound him tighter in the web Emma had prepared. I sat in the back, watching as the man I once married shrank before the weight of truth. The suit that once gave him authority now looked like a costume. His polished words cracked into desperation. His charm disintegrated into panic. He wasn't the powerful figure he believed himself to be. He was just a man stripped of illusions, forced to face the choices he had made so easily. And yet, as satisfying as it was to see justice served, I couldn't help but think of Emma. She had orchestrated this, not out of cruelty, but out of necessity. She had known that if he was not stopped, he would move on to hurt others again. Even in her absence, her brilliance shone through. She turned abandonment into armor, betrayal into strategy, and loss into protection. Her estate did not go to the man who had deserted her. Instead, it became the foundation for something far greater. Scholarships were established for children abandoned by parents. Programs for counseling and mentorship began to take shape, and funds were created to give opportunities to those who had been left behind. Each initiative carried her name, not as a reminder of tragedy, but as a beacon of resilience. I remember visiting one of the first scholarship recipients, a young girl who reminded me so much of Emma's sharp eyes, determined heart. She told me that Emma's story gave her hope, that knowing someone had walked the same painful road made her believe she could build something beautiful from broken pieces. In her words, I heard echoes of my daughter's legacy, not just wealth or recognition, but the power to inspire and protect others. Meanwhile, his downfall was complete. His wife left him, his finances crumbled, and the public saw him for who he truly was. The very fortune he tried to steal became the tool of his undoing. And though part of me wanted to feel pity, I couldn't. Pity is reserved for those who stumbled despite trying. He hadn't stumbled. He had chosen, again and again, to abandon, deceive, and exploit, and choices come with consequences. Standing in my daughter's room one evening, surrounded by the photos of her life, I felt a wave of peace I hadn't known since before she passed. She had done what so many of us only dream of. She left the world better than. She found it. She turned her pain into purpose and her brilliance into protection. My heart ached for the years we lost, for the future she would never see. But I also felt pride so deep it steadied me. This isn't just my story or Emma's story. It's a reminder that love and loyalty carry more weight than greed ever could. It's proof that even in the face of betrayal, resilience can rise. So if you're listening now, I want to ask you something. Have you faced a moment where betrayal could have broken you, but instead you found strength? Share your story, because your voice matters. And just like Emma's, it might be the spark that helps someone else keep going.